Welcome to all our attendees, participants at this webinar. We'll give it a couple more minutes. People are still coming in, and then we'll get started. So good evening to everybody. We're delighted to have you with us. My name is Bernstein. I'm the Executive Director of the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue. For those of you who have not joined us before and perhaps are less familiar with the webinar format, this is Zoom's webinar format as opposed to regular meeting format. And therefore the audience is an audience, and you can only see myself and our two speakers tonight. Towards the end, we will open things up and bring you actually into the room so that we can have a more dialogical experience. But for the first part of the evening, this will be our format. Again, mainly for those who don't know the Rossing Center. The Rossing Center is an interreligious organization based in Jerusalem, which is working to give Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Christians and Muslims the desire and the capacity to build inclusive societies here in the Holy Land, based on shared values of understanding, respect, justice and equality for all. Over the last 2 years, more or less exactly, since shortly after Corona began, we have started doing webinars on a variety of themes to do with interreligious dialogue, interreligious peace building, all sorts of issues to do with those themes. And tonight we are very honored to have with us two wonderful colleagues who are very experienced in the field of peace building here in Israel, Palestine. We will have a chance to think about all sorts of questions to do with dialogue. We gave tonight's session the title, Is Dialogue Enough? I suspect I know what our speakers are going to say in response to that, but we will shortly find out. I will just mention that please, I see that some of you are introducing yourselves through the chat function. Please feel free to do that. It's very nice for you, since you can't see each other, to have a sense of who is in this virtual space, sharing this space with us. As the evening progresses, if you have questions for our panelists, perhaps you could write those in the Q&A, using the Q&A button, since then it's easier for us to spot them in amongst the other chat going on in the chat. So please put your questions in the Q&A. We may not be able to get to all of them, but we will certainly do our best to get to at least some of them as the evening progresses. So I'm delighted to have Huda and Meredith here with us tonight. I'm going to introduce each of them in turn. We will begin with Huda. Huda Abuarquob is the Regional Director of ALLMEP, the Alliance for Middle East Peace or Peacebuilding? Peace. And was the first on-the-ground regional director since 2014. She has many years of experience in conflict resolution, NGO leadership, social change, education, and activism, as well as a lifelong commitment to building strong people-to-people Israeli-Palestinian relations. I will let Huda tell us more about herself and her work and answer the question, is dialogue enough?
So I'll start with answering the question, and through answering the question, I will tell more about who am I, and where I come from. I think the question, is dialogue enough? The immediate answer is no, but it also, we should put the question whether it's an important aspect of transforming conflicts or not. And for sure, it's an important aspect, but it's a means and not an end. And so dialogue in a conflict zone like ours is necessary because the only interaction between the two parties involved in this struggle is basically violent. And when you look at a timeline of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, yeah, there are so many moments of violence and very little moments of quietness. And so the importance of dialogue comes from the fact that dialogue is an important way to communicate in violent times, but it should move beyond the conversation about what's happening and what can we do, and humanizing the other and acknowledging the rights of the other and the narratives, to action. And here we need to define action based on how the communities, both the Palestinian and the Israeli communities, feel about each other, about the land that they are sharing, and about the values that brings them to this place. And so, as the regional director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, which is a network of 160 organizations that are working in the peace building field and using all kinds of theories of change in order to try and impact the conflict, to move it beyond the status quo, to get it to a place where people can find a way to exist and not feel that their existence is threatened, because that's equally, or maybe not equally, felt by both societies, that their existence on the land that they feel so strongly that they belong to is threatened on a daily basis. So what would be the way out of it? I think the Israelis have tried their best to make it an all-Jewish, all-Israeli Jewish state. It didn't work. It's not working. I don't think it will work at some point. And the Palestinians are not going away. And one of the experiences that the Palestinians had in their history of this struggle is that displacement did not give them any freedom or liberation or going back to the land. So there is no intention that there will be a huge reflux or a huge immigration or forced immigration of Palestinians. So this is the status quo when it comes to the people, that we are sharing this land, we're staying on it, we're both determined to continue existing. The question is how we can move the dialogue from small rooms to actions that builds on the resiliency of the people, acknowledges the rights of people living here, also bringing up narratives of coexistence rather than forcing that coexistence on them. And so the network itself has everyone in it, from the organizations that doesn't even acknowledge Israel, as a state, as an occupying force, and they want to end the occupation, and they want to end the settlement activity, to organizations that are settler-based organizations. We believe that everyone should have a voice under that tent, because at the end of the day, what's important is the next generation. And we should not be, as adults, Palestinians and Israelis, whether we believe in God or don't, whether we believe in a set of values that are based on human rights or humanity or social justice, we need, at the end of the day, to change this conflict and transform it. So we do our responsibility as adults towards the new generation, because we know for sure that violence and war is not working for both sides. And at some point, the Israelis will start feeling that the occupation is also very, very pricey on them. And maybe at that point, they will start thinking of engaging with the Palestinians in a way that is not violent. And I would say also the internationals will pay attention to the fact that investing in war is not going to resolve this conflict or any other conflict in the world. So dialogue itself is not enough. Action and redefining or defining that action is our responsibility at this moment in history. Thank you.
Thank you, Huda. I will come back to you perhaps in the questions, as we continue in the questions section, to ask you to speak more perhaps about if you have some ideas as to what sort of actions could perhaps indeed move us forward at this point in the conflict. But
Absolutely.
For now, I will turn to our second speaker, to Meredith Rothbart. Meredith is the co-founder and CEO of Amal-Tikva, who we have had the honor of working with over the last few months in a process of clarifying and sharpening our theory of change and our organization, and strengthening our organizational capacity. Meredith brings over 10 years of experience with Israeli and Palestinian NGOs in project management, fundraising, strategic planning, process leadership, including as director of Kids for Peace Jerusalem. I think that's when I first met Meredith. She has an MA from Hebrew University in community development and lives in Jerusalem. Meredith, please, is dialogue enough?
Thank you for asking, and thank you for having me. We are literally launching a program on Thursday that the main flyer for this particular program was, we know dialogue is not enough, so what is? And this program is engaging peace-building leaders, many of whom are part of ALLMEP, of the network that Huda leads. We're very close partners, and they are exploring what are ways that we can move forward in addition to dialogue, right? And I agree with Huda. Obviously, dialogue is relevant, and I think that there's more questions around what are the problems, right? What are the problems of the conflict? Why is it still happening? Why did it start? What is the actual problem right now, right? I don't want to go back to any timeline. I don't want to talk about who did what to whom, right? But the problem right now, right? And Sarah, we worked on this a lot in our process over the last few months, is that Israelis and Palestinians don't want to make peace. They don't believe that it's possible, and they don't trust each other, right? So dialogue definitely has to be part of that, but that can't be the only thing, right? If we look at what are the roots of these problems and how can we address them, some of the some of the elements of solution to that will be dialogue, but you need to broaden that understanding a little bit more. If I, right now, Meredith, go and have dialogue with Huda, we have not created peace, right? We to the religious leaders, to civil society leaders, communities, and we strategically engage a critical mass of each of these sectors in a meaningful process of understanding to a place where you want to make and have a sense of understanding of what steps to get there would look like, then you'll want to, right? And so the good news is that the peace building field is starting to do that, because there was a major transformation. Amal-Tikva, we did a research study 2 years ago on the state of cross-border peace building. And since then, we have continued with a full-time researcher just following up on the report. And what we have found is that there was actually a very dramatic turning point in 2014 after the war in Gaza and after the kidnapping of the 3 boys and after the murder of Muhammad Abu Khadir, that people started to want to see the other out of a place of despair and out of exactly what Huda was saying, this sense that, all right, well, I guess they're not going anywhere and we're not going anywhere. So whether I like it or not, we need to figure this out. And that's a good start toward belief that something else is possible, right? And breaking it down into manageable parts. And now there have been, over the last few years, many new concepts and controversial ideas other than the previously proposed political solutions, such as, you know, 2-state solution or 1-state solution that everyone was really stuck on. There have been, you know, Micha Goodman shrinking the conflict, a land for all, and the 2 states, 1 homeland. There's starting to be a lot of new ideas. And I'm not here to preach one idea over the other, but what I want to point out is that the change in starting to think outside the box happened around 2014, when a lot of these organizations were really starting to gain traction. And something else happened in peace building, which maybe Huda could speak more to a little bit, is that previously organizations that brought Israelis and Palestinians together that were trying to create peace were focused on getting some people in a room to talk, right? To dialogue. And that was lovely. And it created personal transformation. And those individuals had a, you know, positive experience of the other. And that didn't necessarily go do anything. Or maybe they didn't even have a positive experience with the other. Maybe they had a terrible experience and then they hated the other more. And that was really bad, right? Depends how well it was done. But of course, not at the Rossing Center, because you guys are great. Since 2014, organizations that are working toward peace building are actually much less focused on dialogue. And that means we have about I guess we're more than that, about 8 years of experience, right? Already working on new models, such as teaching each other's languages, which is huge, right? Building tech partnerships, on building skills together, on economic partnerships, right? There's all these new models. And this got very trendy in certain ways, and these projects started to pick up. And what we saw, unfortunately, in May 2021 was that the relationships that built that were based solely on partnerships that said, we don't need dialogue, we're connecting through business and tech and language and skills and professional development and all these other pieces, but they had ignored dialogue, right? That they found themselves to be unstable, that they found themselves to not know how to move forward together. And so what I'm hoping happens in 2022, the new trend we're going to see is that there's a lot of new partnerships, there's a lot of new initiatives, right? And that the really positive, incredible initiatives that started in 2014 are going to internalize that it's true that dialogue is not enough. And it's true that dialogue is not everything. But if you leave it out entirely, then it's not going to be stable. I have been working with my co-founder, Bashir Abubakar, for 5 years, almost 6 years now, very closely, day in and day out. We forget sometimes about the dynamic that I'm an Israeli, that he's a Palestinian, because we were working all day, every day for years. But when things get tense, we remember very quickly that we're on opposite sides. And we pause and we dialogue. And within our team, it's the same, because you have to, because we're not these external parties coming in that are objective, right? We're members of the conflict that we're trying to solve, right? And it's very complicated. And so dialogue is not enough, but neither are all of these other pieces that we're trying to build partnerships with each other without making sure that dialogue is a critical element.
Thank you so much, Meredith. I think I can certainly agree with you that as a peace building organization with a diverse staff with 20 members of staff from a very wide variety of backgrounds, we have found that we have to have a constant flow of dialogue as well as working with each other, and that there are often issues that come up for us as a diverse team that we have to stop and talk about, because we can't just assume, we can't take it for granted. So of course, if we can't, after all these years of working together, then neither can other organizations. And I tend to agree with you that I think that, well, so this feeds into my next question as to why it feels to me like dialogue has had a great, that perhaps there has been more dialogue in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict than in the history of any other conflict. I may be wrong. I'm not actually an academic in that field, but this dialogue has had a very strong hold in Israel-Palestine for years. I'm wondering why, but I'm also wondering why it then went out of fashion and people thought that you know, dialogue became almost a dirty word, as something that we don't need. We shouldn't be dialogue, you know, was sort of rejected a little bit. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that. Huda?
I think the problem is that dialogue at some point in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was imposed by the leadership when they decided to do negotiation. It wasn't organic, it wasn't authentic, it didn't come from a place of need. And I think this is the issue. And it didn't come from people. People didn't initiate it. It was organizations, institutions, political leaders, everyone who was part of the Oslo. The second part is that it wasn't inclusive. It was, until recently, a very exclusive club that claimed dialogue as the tool for some sort of getting to know the other. And one of the things that I've always fought is, why is it only the left-leaning parties that are leading the dialogue effort? And you know, why sometimes I participate. I'm not speaking from my experience as a regional director now. I'm speaking as a participant who started doing these encounters in 1997, just right after the Palestinian Authority started deployment here, and it was all legitimate, and it was through Palestinian Authority channels, etc. The second part is that political stamp on it, which was almost lefty thinking people who led it. And it, in many ways, it disempowered the Palestinian voice. It was the Israeli lefty who is against the Israeli occupation, yelling at the Israeli people all the time and and bringing a Palestinian as a tokenized partner. So these are two issues that contributed to the failing of dialogue as a means to change the conflict. I would say that there was failure on the side of the organizations when it came to how they ran camps, for instance, for dialogue. There was not enough preparation for both sides uninationally before they get to the room together. And then there was not so much follow-up after the encounter itself, the binational encounter. And there was also very, very limited facilitation processes in which promoted notions like avoiding the conflict, avoiding the big questions, avoiding pain, avoiding trauma, avoiding God, and just engaging in a conversation about food, sports, and art, and nothing against these things. These are also important aspects of people's lives, but they will never be able to change people from within. And the last thing that I would say is everyone who participated in dialogue processes during the 90s, they had different expectations when they came into the process. The Israelis want the Palestinians not to kill them. The Palestinians want the Israelis to leave. That was basically to end the occupation. And both expectations were not met. The kids who participated in a peace camp somewhere in Europe or in the United States came back to a reality that is totally different from what was created in these rooms. This whole respect for humanity and recognition of identity and narratives did not help when a Palestinian kid crossed a checkpoint and found a soldier who was his mate in the camp standing there. It again put them back to a place or to the roles that the institutions want them to play. So this made the dialogue and even the word peace look like some sort of process of assimilation or accepting the conflict, accepting the occupation and not fighting it. And it's about taming the Palestinians because they are the violent party, but there was no effort working on the structural violence coming from Israel. There was also very little work on identity. You know, there was an attempt to create a different identity and a shared narrative without talking about previous narratives, what brought us here. There was also this ping pong accusations back and forth. Who started the whole thing? 5,000 years ago or 1948? And these are all very important questions to be tackled, but there was not enough room or skilled facilitation or let me say nuanced facilitation processes in order to do that. And I have to say also that the international conflict resolution, conflict transformation arena in general didn't also have aspects of what I'm talking about. I was a Fulbright student between 2004 and 2006, and I did my master's degree in conflict transformation and peace education and at Eastern Mennonite University. And it was the first time I hear the term trauma and its impact on people and how unhealed, unspoken, unresolved traumas can contribute to igniting the conflict even more. There was also an attempt to suppress narratives of cooperation and coexistence and Jews living in Palestine before 1948, talking about 1929 massacre in Hebron. All of that was dismissed. We just wanted to move to the two-state solution as the solution and not get people engaged in even imagining what would the two-state solution look like. And I think also this exclusivity that the leadership from both sides practiced by dismissing any other voices that goes against the two-state solution kind of also contributed to the feeling that this is not an authentic process for tangible change on the ground. And so everyone failed in meeting their expectations, goals, or even feeling a little bit safer or feeling what peace means on the ground. And if the people like me and Meredith cannot experience peace on the ground, then we will not be able to talk about it or imagine it in a dialogue conversation.
Wow. Huda, you've given us a lot to think about, and a lot to think about, assuming that even though dialogue is not enough, it has to be part of the solution, how we do it in order to not fall into all those traps that you mentioned and outlined. Meredith, would you like to respond?
Sure. I mean, I agree with so much. I mean, we're really on the same page, Huda, and that I'll just add to that feeling of what dialogue used to be about, right, in the post-Oslo era, or at these different points in history over the last 25 years where there was a peace process, right? It used to feel in peace building that we were preparing for a peace that was soon to be made, right? And we needed to all get excited and on the same page and okay with it through meeting with each other and having dialogue, so that, when there was a magical handshake that was going to magically create peace, just like Oslo was so beautiful for all of us, right? Not so much in the end. We were going to all just sing Kumbaya and everything would be fine, right? And I think that, we got frustrated. People saw that dialogue wasn't enough. It wasn't working. How many circles can you sit in and cry and have feelings and then go home to exactly as Huda described, right? And, as somebody who was in that world, in the 20 years post-Oslo, when we were looking at why running these dialogue programs isn't enough, why isn't it working, right? We did an evaluation in Kids for Peace with US Institute of Peace after 10 years. And we found that our model of bringing these youth together wasn't working, right? And we had to change it. It wasn't enough. We had to train the youth to take action together, to learn how you develop, activism projects that can actually create change, how to measure success, how to check to make sure that what you're doing is effective, right? And then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And if it works, you keep doing and you build upon it. And if it's not working, then you try something else, right? And that became the model that a lot of the organizations around that time, around 2013, 14, were starting to go through. And then the war, and what we were saying before also, that all these new populations came into peace building, and they didn't come into it with the perspective of, I want to meet the other, I want to talk to the other, I want to become friends. They came with it with the perspective of, all right, how are we going to get through this? What are we going to do? What's going to make it work? And some people believed economic partnerships, and some people believed medical research sharing, and whatever field they were in, said, let's do this for peace, right? And let's figure it out. And so many of those people, right, we have, this is spelled out a bit in the report as well, they weren't coming to interact with the opposite side for the sake of dialogue. They didn't want to talk about their pain. They didn't want to address it and deal with it. They just wanted to fix it by building a relationship that was mutually interdependent. And so we would stop killing each other because we needed each other in some, mutually beneficial synergy, which is fine. It's not a bad thing. It's not sustainable if there isn't a deep relationship, right? And so I want to cite some of the work of, for example, Rabbi Melchior with Sheikh Raed Badir, and that the depth of dialogue at the top level and the negotiations level that they're doing in a track 2 capacity, right? That needs to be happening. There needs to be deep dialogue and understanding of the other side at all levels of society, right? In all of the ways in which we're interacting. And so we have actually taken the the step, which feels bold, but should be obvious, of redefining peace building, right? Peace building used to be dialogue. And we have decided with our stakeholders and our board and our team that we're no longer allowing peace building to be loosely defined by whatever organizations are active. We're going to say it is defined by a reality in which there is less hatred, tension, and violence, right? Improved systems of interaction, whether we want to be interacting or not, right? And an increased quality of life. And if there's organizations that are working to create an increased quality of life on one side or the other, they are working to create a more peaceful reality, or improving systems of interaction, whether intentional or forced, right? That will help contribute toward a more peaceful reality and and reducing hatred, tension, and violence. And so in all of those elements, dialogue is beneficial, but the first critical element has a lot of dialogue as a necessity. And so it's part of the picture.
I think that segues into a question from the audience, but that is also, I think that Huda, a lot of what you talked about was some of the background to the growth of the anti-normalization movement, that the frustration with all this dialogue and the fact that it didn't change any reality on the ground led to that movement. And Meredith, you in a way, you know, at least some of the projects you mention of joint tech and joint this and joint that and joint the other. My husband and I sometimes joke that these days, if you just add the words for peace after anything you do, you can claim to be doing peace building. So we sometimes go and play tennis and call it tennis for peace, but that's not real. We're not actually contributing to peace building. Obviously not when it's me and my husband. But you know, not everything just calling it for peace means it is for peace. So first of all, what do we do about the anti-normalization movement, which is very against dialogue, because you have both said that you do believe that dialogue has to be part of peace building, and what distinguishes activities that are normalizing from activities that are non-normalizing, activities that are challenging the status quo. I will add to that something that Huda, you talked about people coming away from dialogue feeling that their needs had not been met. But I sometimes suspect that one of the weaknesses of dialogue is that Israelis often come away from dialogue feeling that they have done their bit, that the dialogue is their action, that coming to listen to Palestinians, they have taken action and their needs have been met, because they can now think of themselves as better people, as more moral people, because they are listening and they are hearing the other side. But it's not enough. So what do we do?
First of all, I have to say that since 2014, the war, the violence against Gaza happened. Many of the Jewish activists that I know moved beyond that bit, that I want to meet a Palestinian and that's it. I did my bit. I washed my guilt, and now I can speak on their behalf anywhere I go. It changed, and I have to say that Meredith and I are very proud of the fact that we put a lot of effort since 2014 until now to raise the capacity of our peace building community in order to become more savvy and responsive to the needs of the people who are engaged in the dialogue, rather than just washing guilt or getting a permit to go and pray in Al-Aqsa. Because this is also, the Palestinians came into the room trying to gain some benefits that, you know, the besieged normally don't get. But because they participate in a dialogue meeting, they get a permit to go to Jerusalem, and then they leave in the middle of the day to go to do shopping or pray in Al-Aqsa. And then they ask a Jewish friend to help them cross the checkpoint, all of that. This is not going to change the dynamics. And I think May 2021, we saw a more active, what we called at that moment, co-resistance of, and I know the word resistance is very charged, but we got to a point where many of Israeli and Palestinian veterans of dialogue came together and they said, this is not working. Even the word coexistence is not viable anymore. The Palestinians who are citizens of Israel are refusing to use it. We need to come up with something different, not on the terms or terminology basis, but on action basis. And we've seen tens of organizations getting together, doing direct action, going to the streets, speaking against the war, speaking against violence. And we saw Women Wage Peace with standing together, although they are totally different when it comes to their approach to resolving the conflict. But we had a term that was born during that time that we introduced, and we are still experimenting with that. Social justice is about equal participation in changing oppressive systems, and also speaking to values, to the values of the people who are involved in that conflict. We want to engage, but we want this engagement to change the politics of the conflict. And so they adopted a term called co-resistance, in which Jews and Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and atheists also standing together, speaking against all forms of oppression, including internal Palestinian forms of oppression. And we've seen people paying the price for it. From the peace-building community, denied visas, denied permits, put in prison, both in Palestine and in Israel. And so I think this also, in my opinion, will contribute to changing the hegemony of an elite group. And I'm going to be very blunt about the anti-normalization group, because it's another elite group that speaks to each other and has the audacity to evaluate other groups' work by saying this is normalization without even bringing a clear definition of normalization. So how we would respond to that? We study the rhetoric of normalization and anti-normalization. We redefine peace building and people to people in terms of what it serves on the ground. What is it authentically speaking? Not tennis for peace. We can play tennis and we can call it for peace, but we will go back home and we both will not have peace with our own families because we met the other, and the other is a monster. So in my opinion, and based on the experience that we had in raising the capacity of these organizations, from rethinking their theory of change to defying also the lack of resources and the competition over resources, to defying the inefficiency when it comes to managing these resources, to also being strong enough to respond to all the anti forces. We emerged strongly after May 2021. We showed something of resiliency that only the Palestinians and Israelis can show in the world. And the dialogue for the sake of dialogue stopped being the main event. And the main event is, okay, what are we doing tomorrow? If the war happens again, what's our responsibility? Can we get together and organize a demonstration? Can we get together and go to the Knesset and speak against it? Can we get together and do a policy paper and send it and communicate to the American Congress people who come and visit that this is what the people want? Can we open more hand-in-hand schools? Can we work on dual or multiple narratives? Can we bring God back to the conversation and see whether God is the problem or part of the solution? Can we stop labeling people? Can we also start practicing what we are preaching, which is, if we have an issue with a group like the Anti-Normalization group, why not extending an invitation for a conversation with them? And we did. And if there is one group is being hit by anti-normalization, and again, to their credit, they do use nonviolent tactics, but when they expose some of the constituents who participate in activities that they call normalization, we stand as a community together against it, and we protect our students and our employees. Not only that, we worked so hard in the past 3 years, at least, on the visibility issue. We used to be hiding in rooms, and we still, some of us cannot afford protection. But there are so many people who are coming forward, and I have to say, it's more women and youth who are coming forward and are aware of the risks they are taking, and they are telling their story as it is, and they are not ashamed of being peace builders because it speaks to their values. We need to integrate these values into our social systems, our ethical values, set of values. There is no shame in Islam or in Christianity or in Judaism or in human rights or in human being values to be a peace builder. At the end of the day, this peace is only going to not only benefit you, it is going to benefit you as a human being, but it's also going to be benefiting the entire neighborhood. And just give me one example of a preaching against that. And then we will stand against it. If anti-normalization groups think that by meeting by a Palestinian woman, meeting an Israeli woman is practicing some sort of giving away part of her identity, they are so wrong, especially when it comes to women, the Palestinian women. We have evidence based in research that the more you participate in such conversations and actions, the stronger your identity becomes. The more connected you are to the just cause you represent, the more human being you feel, the more equal you want to be and you strive to be. And then the more demanding you could be in order to have your rights intact. So there is a lot that we can say about the impact on a personal transformation thing. The big idea and the big question is how we can move that transformation from personal or, from groups transformation to a more of a communal transformation. And my answer directly is, again, the dialogue is a means, the action is an end. We need to define the action. There are 160 organizations in the network who do all kinds of actions and theory of change, from education to religious conversations, to ecosystems, to water rights, to direct actions, to everything that you can think of. But at the end of the day, what we take back to our community, and when we work with our community to respond to the needs of our community, this is what's going to change the conflict. Unfortunately, so far, the international community still demands that a huge part of the funding should go towards putting 20 Israelis and 20 Palestinians in one room. Still, they are not getting to a savvy thinking that this is not working, and we should encourage more uninational prep and conversations, and then come together to build on that in order to do policy advocacy.
Thank you, Huda. has, as before, a lot to think about. Meredith, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that Huda did a really excellent analysis on normalization, and I don't think that I have anything really to add. Thank you, Huda. I would love to answer the question around actions and what does that look like. So I had a really great opportunity in last year to work with John, who was on Huda's team, and some other colleagues on putting together a actual implementation plan for the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act, which is a $250 million investment from the US government in Israeli-Palestinian peace building. And we had the opportunity to co-author this implementation plan with other colleagues from the field on what it would look like. And I want to share with you our analysis of some of the spaces that are available. And I'll just list it off a little bit. And you can just know each one of these elements was developed from research around core root causes to the intractable nature of the conflict, okay? So we're talking about creating space, building actual centers for co-working, for opportunities for interaction, for community engagement, and within the centers offering opportunities for building, business and tech partnerships, labs for shared community initiatives. A lot of our theory on this was built off of shared community center projects that actually exist, right? That are, for example, bringing women together to improve wellness care. Sorry, I'm translating from Hebrew in my mind. To improve wellness care for children age 0 to 5, or to build economic partnerships between neighboring cities where it makes more sense, it's less wasteful to have infrastructure, like municipal infrastructure, integrated between Jewish and Palestinian areas. There's environmental collaboration, talking about sharing and solar infrastructure, water infrastructure, joint policies that will affect climate change for the better, wastewater, landfills, wildlife protection, right? Concrete elements of partnership that we have no choice but to work together on, because we're literally on the same land, right? Breathing the same air, drinking the same water, and requires peaceful negotiation, right? Regional tourism, which would be extremely beneficial. Track 2 diplomacy, insider mediation at the religious and mid-level, right? At the municipal level. Elements of cultural competency, whether it's language training, understanding each other's culture, translation of materials in the different government offices, making the process of forced interactions, right, better, more manageable, easier, to improve quality of life, right? University research partnerships, internships, fellowships, scholarships, right? I'm still looking here. Religious declarations in support of peace, so that all of the religious leaders there are hundreds of religious leaders part of different interfaith dialogue networks that are doing this work quietly, to feel confident sharing that partnership and that experience in public spaces, to create a culture of role models and leaders that are engaging with one another, right? Grassroots engagement. There are so many incredible women's projects, right? There's a center in East Jerusalem that is bringing mothers together who have children who have cancer to support one another, to share their resources on how they're coping through this program. And they live near each other and they can share rides to different, therapies. They can share their experience. Programs bringing children and youth together, life skills training, informal education programs, leadership training, public speaking, model UN, okay? Just a few more. We want to talk about advocacy around education policy, okay? Talk about the Rossing Center and some of the amazing work that they do, right? There's a lot of organizations trying to bring youth together. Well, the Rossing Center, for example, really fits into our theory of change because they're training teachers to speak to their youth in their classrooms about the conflict, about how to process it, about how to handle it, about how to manage it, right? So those youth are not going on the street and attacking the other when they're frustrated, because they are able to process it with their teacher. So there's uninational work, there's negotiation skills training, there's a ton of actions, and it's happening. It just needs to be scaled.
Thank you so much. We're going to move to, we're going to gradually start letting everybody into the room so that we can, people can interact a little more to the extent that Zoom allows it, a little more naturally, and people can ask their own questions live. So John and